When picking comparables to analyze a property, maybe when you're doing a CMA or any other type of analysis, it's really hard to know where to go. Do you go a mile? Do you go 2 miles? Do you stay within the same neighborhood? Over the last couple of years, I've been asked this question a ton of times by agents. How far away do I go? How do I determine my location for my comparables? And so in this video, we're going to break that down. We're going to talk about some of the myths associated with it, as well as the best practices to make sure that you're identifying all the best comparable properties and excluding everything else that shouldn't be considered. Hey, what's up? It's Jeff with Property Brain, and in this video, I want to talk to you about searching for comps and specifically about nailing down the location aspect of it, finding your market boundaries and identifying the comps that fall within it. That's one of the biggest questions I've gotten over the last couple of years from agents is how do I know where to look for comps? Do I go a mile away? Do I go 3 miles away? Do I stay in the same neighborhood? It can be really confusing because you've probably been told a bunch of different things. And so in this video, we're going to talk about a couple of the myths that are associated with location when searching for comps. And we're also going to talk about some of the best practices that you can implement to make sure that you're identifying all the best comparables and excluding everything else that shouldn't be considered. So first, let's dive in and let's talk about the most common myths when it comes to searching for comps in regards to location. So myth number one is that you have to be within 1 mile. Now, this is something that has been quoted by appraisers, by agents, by lenders, pretty much everybody for a long time. And the reality is it's a guideline, but it's not a rule. And so what that means is that ideally you would be within 1 mile. When you're searching for comps, you wouldn't go, 1.5, 2 miles away, because the idea is that the further away you get, the less similar the properties are and the less impact they actually have on the specific property you're trying to do an analysis of. And while that's true most times, there are cases in which you might need to go more than 1 mile. And so, like I said, it's not really a rule, it's more of a guideline. And it can be a good way to try to make sure when you're looking at comparables, you want to look how far away they are and you want to try to get comps that are within that mile. But if you're in a situation where you have limited data or maybe you have a unique property type, you might actually need to go more than 1 mile away. Especially if you're doing something that's rural or on acreage, you definitely want to be able to go a couple miles away because you might need to go 3 or 4 or maybe even 10 miles to be able to find similar properties. So make sure that when you're considering the myth of location in distance, just remember it's a rule. It's not a rule, that it's a guideline and it is flexible, but you want to use it kind of to help, again, guide you into finding the best comps. Myth number 2, when it comes to location for searching for comparables, is that you have to use comps within the same neighborhood. And while this would be ideal, again, there's times where you may not be able to find a good comparable in the neighborhood, or at least you may not be able to find multiple good comparables. Ideally, you're going to be able to find at least 1 or 2. And in most cases, especially if there's a lot of sales in the market at the time, you'll be able to find most of your comps within your neighborhood. But if you're in a time where there's limited sales, or if you have a unique property, you might only be able to find 1 or 2 comparables. In fact, they might not even be great comparables, but you still may want to use 1 or 2 properties in your neighborhood to be able to help make sure that you're analyzing that neighborhood's value and not missing anything there. But you also want to let yourself go outside of your neighborhood. The key is to make sure that you're going to similar neighborhoods. So if you're looking at a property in a specific neighborhood and there are a couple other neighborhoods nearby that are similar quality and age and size, you would be able to go to those neighborhoods and pick comps from there as well. So again, the using comps from your neighborhood is a guideline. It would be ideal, but in a lot of scenarios, you need to branch out outside of that. So then we've talked about some of the myths. Let's talk about the best practices for location when picking comps. The ultimate best practice when picking comps and determining the location of the market boundaries is to think like the potential buyer. So try to sit back and think about the typical buyer for a property. Where else would they look? Would they look only within a specific neighborhood? Maybe it's such a unique neighborhood that they're only going to look in that neighborhood. 8 out of 10 of them maybe are only going to look in that neighborhood. In that case, you might want to stay only in that neighborhood. But in most cases, a buyer is going to be willing to look at a bunch of different neighborhoods. They're going to be looking at a general price point. They might be within a certain school district or in a certain area of town where they want to be in a general area close to certain amenities or businesses or something like that. And so you want to try to think like the buyer. And the best way to do this is is just sit and think, if you are showing the house that you're doing analysis on, maybe doing a CMA or you're analyzing an offer or something, and you're going to think like a potential buyer of that and say, if I was setting up a search for them and this home showed up, what else would have shown? Where else would they have looked? Would they have asked me to go look at homes in this other neighborhood? Would they have asked me to go, over a certain street? Or would they have said, no, I only want to be, north of this street and south of that street? And so you got to just get in the mind of the buyer as best as you can. And sometimes you're going to know this really well. And sometimes you're going to have a really loose grasp on this, and you're going to try your best to come up with market boundaries. And so once you've thought like them, the second step is to actually draw in those market boundaries. When you're in your search, whether you're in your MLS or something like Property Brain, you want to use a market boundary to actually draw in the boundaries on the map so that you can make sure that you are only looking at properties within those boundaries. And then to go back to some of the myths, sometimes when you draw these boundaries in, it might be more than a mile in some directions, and it might be less than a mile in others. So for example, you might need to go 1.5 miles north and south, but you might only want to go a half of a mile or a quarter of a mile east and west. And so rather than using something like a radius or just looking at distance from a property and saying, I'm only including things within a mile, you could actually draw in your boundaries and include all the properties that fall within a reasonable market boundary that a typical buyer would look at. I hope that this video has helped give you a little bit better of an idea of how to do the location when it comes to a comp search. Like I said, there are a number of myths out there as far as, staying within a mile or staying within the same neighborhood, and all the myths that you've heard when it comes to location of search are just guidelines. It means that if an appraiser were to go outside of these in a future appraisal, that they would have to explain why. And so you might have to, if you use comps that fall outside of those typical guidelines, explain to an appraiser why you chose those comps when you're pricing a property. But it doesn't mean that they can't be used. As long as they're still good comparables from a reasonable area that a buyer would consider, they can be great comps. And so it's important to just make sure that you're not worrying about those guidelines. You're kind of staying within them if you can, but expanding outside of them by thinking like a buyer and setting your market boundaries. And by drawing them on the map, you're going to make sure that you're getting the best potential property. So anyway, I hope again that this has been helpful. If you want to check out some of our other videos on comp search and some of the other things that can go into it once you have those boundaries set, definitely check those out. We'd encourage you to do so. If you have any questions, let us know. We'd love to help you out however we can. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you found some of this information helpful. If you did, I'd love it if you'd hit the like button. And while you're at it, go ahead and follow us on some of your favorite social media channels to make sure that you can connect with us, where we can answer questions and just get to know you a little bit. Thanks again for watching the video, and we'll see you in the next one.